The moment Jackson Zane saw the figure huddled against the canyon wall through the swirling snow, he knew something was terribly wrong in a way that made his heart clench with an urgency he had not felt in years. He pulled his horse to a stop, squinting through the late February blizzard that had blown in from nowhere across the New Mexico territory, turning what should have been a clear 1884 winter evening into a whiteout nightmare. The figure moved, and he caught a glimpse of dark hair and pale skin. A woman, and beside her something else, something struggling. Jackson dismounted quickly, his boots crunching through the rapidly accumulating snow. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the past hour, and he knew that anyone caught out here without proper shelter would not survive the night. As he drew closer, leading his horse behind him, he saw her more clearly. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with long dark hair plastered to her face by melting snow, and her lips were turning blue. But what shocked him most was what she was protecting with her body: a newborn foal, still wet and shaking, its spindly legs folded beneath it. "Madam," Jackson called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open, and even in the dim light he could see they were a startling green, filled with determination despite her obvious exhaustion. "The foal," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "She was just born. The mare. The mare ran off when the storm hit. I could not leave her." Jackson assessed the situation quickly. The woman wore only a thin wool coat over what looked like riding clothes, completely inadequate for this weather. The foal was shivering violently, its brown coat still damp from birth. They were about 3 miles from Oro Grande, but in this storm it might as well have been 30. He needed to get them warm, and he needed to do it now. "I have a camp about half a mile back in a sheltered canyon," he said, already shrugging out of his heavy coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. "Can you stand?" she tried, but her legs gave out immediately. Jackson caught her before she fell, feeling how cold her skin was even through his gloves. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he wondered when she had last eaten a proper meal. "The foal," she protested weakly, trying to twist in his arms. "I will get her too," Jackson promised, "but I need to get you on my horse first." He managed to get her settled in the saddle, though she swayed dangerously. Working quickly, he gathered the foal in his arms. The little creature was surprisingly light, and she made small, frightened noises against his chest. Jackson mounted behind the woman, keeping one arm around her waist to hold her steady while cradling the foal with the other. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Ranger, snorted his displeasure at the extra weight and the strange burden, but responded to Jackson's commands. The ride back to his camp felt endless. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, and Jackson kept talking to her, anything to keep her awake. "My name is Jackson Zane. I have been tracking wild horses for the past 3 days. What is your name?" "Nora," she murmured. "Nora Garrett." "What were you doing out here, Nora Garrett, looking for?" "Looking for the wild herd. I am a horse breeder, or trying to be." "Heard there was a stallion out here worth catching." Her words were slurred, and Jackson felt a spike of fear. Hypothermia was setting in. "Stay with me, Nora. We are almost there." When they finally reached his camp, tucked into a small canyon with an overhang that provided protection from the worst of the wind, Jackson had never been more grateful for his habit of thorough preparation. He had set up a proper camp with canvas walls extending from the overhang, creating a sheltered space. His fire was still burning, though it had died down to coals. He dismounted carefully, lifting the foal down first and setting her near the fire before reaching up for Nora. She was barely conscious now, and he carried her close to the flames, laying her on his bedroll. The foal struggled to stand, her legs still wobbly, and Jackson quickly built up the fire, adding larger pieces of wood until the flames cast dancing light across the canvas walls. Working with practiced efficiency, he removed Nora's wet coat and boots, then wrapped her in his spare blankets. She needed to get out of the wet clothes entirely, but that would have to wait until she was more conscious. For now, he focused on getting her core temperature up. He heated water in his tin pot, adding a bit of precious coffee and sugar, and when it was warm enough, he lifted her head gently. "Nora, I need you to drink this." Her eyes opened slightly, unfocused. Jackson held the cup to her lips, and she managed a few small sips before turning her head away. It was something, at least. He set the cup aside and turned his attention to the foal. The little one was lying down again, still shivering despite the warmth of the fire. Jackson grabbed an old shirt from his saddlebag and began rubbing the foal down vigorously, drying her coat and stimulating circulation. The foal made small, whinnying sounds, and he kept talking to her in a low, soothing voice. "You are a fighter, are you not? Born in the middle of a blizzard and still kicking. Your mama will be proud when we find her." As he worked, he kept glancing at Nora. Her shivering had intensified, which was actually a good sign. It meant her body was still fighting. He moved back to her, chafing her hands between his, then her feet. Her skin was like ice. "Come on, Nora. You saved this little one's life. Do not give up on yours now." Hours passed in a blur of tending to both his unexpected charges. Jackson kept the fire blazing, melting snow for water, warming broth from his supplies. Gradually, Nora's color began to improve, the dangerous blue tinge fading from her lips. The foal, too, seemed to rally, her shivering subsiding as her coat dried to a fluffy brown. It was well past midnight when Nora's eyes finally opened fully and focused on him. Jackson was sitting cross-legged near the fire, the foal's head resting in his lap as he stroked her neck. "Where am I?" Nora's voice was hoarse but stronger than before. "My camp about 3 miles northeast of Oro Grande," Jackson said. "How are you feeling?" She tried to sit up, winced, and he quickly moved to help her, supporting her back as she settled into a sitting position. She looked around, taking in the canvas shelter, the fire, and finally the foal. "She is alive," Nora breathed, and Jackson heard the emotion in her voice. "Thanks to you. What you did, protecting her like that, it was either very brave or very foolish." A ghost of a smile crossed Nora's pale face. "Probably both." "I heard the mare in distress, followed the sound, and found her giving birth. But then the storm hit so suddenly, and the mare panicked and ran. I could not leave the baby alone. She would have frozen to death within an hour." "So would you have," Jackson pointed out gently. Nora met his eyes, and in the firelight he could see they were not just green but had flecks of gold near the pupils. "I know, but I could not live with myself if I had abandoned her." Something in Jackson's chest tightened at her words. He had known plenty of people in his 30 years who would have walked away, who would have valued their own survival over that of an animal. But this woman, this stranger, had been willing to die for a creature that was not even hers. "What is your story?" he found himself asking. "You said you are trying to be a horse breeder." Nora accepted the cup of warm broth he offered, wrapping her hands around it gratefully. "My father was a horse trader in Missouri. He taught me everything about horses, how to spot good bloodlines, how to train them, how to heal them when they were sick. When he died 2 years ago, I thought I could continue his business, but—" She paused, taking a sip. A woman running a horse trading business was not acceptable to most people. "I lost clients, lost respect. 6 months ago, I decided to come west, to New Mexico territory, and start fresh. I have a small piece of land outside Oro Grande, just 20 acres, but it has good grass and a creek. I have been trying to build a herd, but quality horses are expensive. So you thought you would catch a wild stallion. I heard about him from some ranch hands in town. They called him the Ghost because of his silver coat. Said he had been running with a herd up in these canyons. I thought if I could catch him, I could use him to breed quality horses. She looked down at the broth. It was a stupid idea, I see that now. Not stupid, Jackson said quietly. Ambitious, maybe a bit reckless, but not stupid. He fed another log to the fire. I've been tracking that same stallion for 3 days myself. I work for the Garrison Ranch about 15 miles south of Oro Grande. The owner wants that horse badly enough to offer a $100 bonus to whoever brings him in. Nora's eyes widened. $100, that is a fortune. Mr. Garrison is a wealthy man, and he wants the best bloodlines for his herd. Jackson studied her face in the firelight. But I will tell you what I learned in 3 days of tracking: that stallion is not going to be caught by one person alone. He is too smart, too fast, and he knows this territory better than any of us ever will. The foal stirred in Jackson's lap, making a small sound, and Nora's attention shifted immediately. "May I?" she asked, reaching out. Jackson carefully transferred the foal, and Nora cradled the tiny creature against her chest, tears suddenly streaming down her face. "I thought we were going to die," she whispered. "Both of us. The cold was so intense and I was so tired. I just kept thinking that if I closed my eyes it would be over, but then she would die too, and I could not let that happen." "You are both safe now," Jackson said, and he was surprised by the protective feeling that surged through him. He barely knew this woman, had only found her hours ago, but something about her spirit, her determination, called to something deep inside him. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside their shelter and the crackle of the fire. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Jackson knew they would be stuck here until it passed, probably another day at least. "You should try to sleep," he finally said. "You need to let your body recover." "What about you?" Nora asked, her eyes searching his face. "I will keep the fire going and watch over you both." When she opened her mouth to protest, he held up a hand. "I am fine, Nora. I have done this 100 times. Besides, someone needs to make sure this little one stays warm." Reluctantly, Nora settled back down on the bedroll, the foal curled against her. Jackson spread his coat over them both as an extra layer, then positioned himself near the fire where he could easily tend it through the night. He watched as Nora's breathing evened out, her face relaxing into sleep, one hand resting protectively on the foal. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Jackson had dozed off and on through the night, waking every hour to feed the fire. When he finally opened his eyes fully, he found Nora awake, sitting up and examining the foal in the bright morning light. "She is a filly," Nora said when she noticed Jackson stirring. "And look at her legs, she is going to be tall. Good bone structure too." Jackson moved to sit beside her, and together they studied the little horse. In the daylight, he could see that the filly had a small white star on her forehead and one white sock on her rear left leg. Her eyes were bright and curious, already losing some of the vulnerability from the night before. "She is going to need milk soon," Nora said, concern creeping into her voice. "Without her mother, I do not know how long she can survive." "There is a ranch about 4 miles west of here," Jackson said. "The Hendersons, they have goats. We can try to get there this morning, see if we can get some goat's milk. It is not ideal, but it will keep her alive until we can find her mother or another mare who is nursing." "You would do that?" Nora asked, turning to look at him fully for the first time in daylight. Jackson felt his breath catch slightly. She was beautiful, with high cheekbones, full lips, and those extraordinary eyes, but it was more than that. There was an intelligence in her gaze, a strength that drew him in. "Of course," he said, clearing his throat. "I am not going to let her starve after we went to all that trouble to save her last night." Nora smiled, a real smile that transformed her whole face, and Jackson felt something shift in his chest. He stood quickly, suddenly needing to move to do something with his hands. "I will make some breakfast. We have a long ride ahead of us." As Jackson prepared a simple meal of bacon and coffee, Nora attempted to stand for the first time since the night before. She swayed slightly, and he quickly moved to steady her. "Easy," he said, his hands on her arms. "You were nearly frozen last night. Your body needs time to recover." "I am fine," Nora insisted, but her legs trembled. She looked down at herself, seeming to notice for the first time that her clothes were draped near the fire, still drying. "Did you?" "Only your outer coat and boots," Jackson said quickly, feeling heat rise in his face. "You were soaked through. I left everything else, just wrapped you in blankets." Nora nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life." "You saved hers," Jackson said, nodding toward the filly. "I just provided the fire." They ate breakfast in comfortable quiet, the filly lying contentedly between them. When Nora was dressed again in her now dry clothes, Jackson packed up his camp efficiently. He had done it so many times it was second nature, but he was aware of Nora watching him, learning his methods. "How long have you been a cowboy?" she asked as he secured his bedroll to Ranger's saddle. "Since I was 14, Jackson replied. "My father died when I was young, and my mother could not support both me and my two younger sisters on her own. I hired on as a ranch hand, sent most of my wages home. Eventually worked my way up to being a horse wrangler, which is what I do now for the Garrison Ranch. You enjoy it?" Jackson paused, considering the question. Most people never asked him that. "I do. I have always had a way with horses. They make sense to me in a way people sometimes do not. And being out here in the open country, there is a freedom in it that I cannot imagine giving up." Nora smiled. "I understand that. When I am working with horses, everything else falls away. It is just me and them, and everything makes sense." Their eyes met, and Jackson felt that pull again, that sense of recognition. Before he could examine the feeling too closely, the filly struggled to stand, her legs shaking with the effort. "She is getting stronger," Nora said, moving to help the little horse. "But she is going to need food soon. Her energy will not last long. Then we should get moving." The ride to the Henderson Ranch was slow, with Jackson leading Ranger while Nora rode and carried the filly. The landscape was transformed by the snow, the red rocks and scrub brush now dusted white, creating a stark beauty that took Jackson's breath away. He had lived in New Mexico territory for 6 years now, and he never tired of the way the land could surprise him. Nora was quiet for most of the ride, and Jackson wondered what she was thinking. He found himself stealing glances at her, noting the way she held the filly so carefully, the way her eyes scanned the horizon as if searching for something. "What made you choose New Mexico?" he asked after a while, needing to break the silence. "It was far enough from Missouri that I could start fresh, but not so far that I felt completely unmoored," Nora replied. "And I heard there was opportunity here, land that was still affordable, towns that were still growing. I thought maybe, just maybe, people would be more willing to give a woman a chance to prove herself." "Have they been?" Nora's laugh was bitter. "Some yes, most no. The banker in Oro Grande looked at me like I had 3 heads when I asked for a loan to buy breeding stock. The men at the livery stable overcharge me for feed because they think I do not know any better. And the ranchers around here, they would rather do business with anyone but a woman. That must be difficult." "It is infuriating," Nora said bluntly. I know more about horses than half the men in this territory, but because I wear a skirt, I am dismissed. I am trying to build something real, something lasting, but every door I approach seems to be locked." Jackson heard the frustration in her voice, the hurt beneath the anger. "For what it is worth, I saw how you handled that filly last night. You knew exactly what she needed. That is not something that can be taught. You either have an understanding of horses or you do not, and you clearly do." Nora looked down at him, surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." They reached the Henderson ranch just before noon. It was a modest operation with a small house, a barn, and several pens for the goats and chickens. Sarah Henderson, a sturdy woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands, took one look at the filly and immediately understood the situation. "Come inside, all of you," she said, ushering them toward the house. "Tom," she called to her husband, who was working near the barn, "we need fresh goat's milk and plenty of it." Within minutes, they were seated at the Hendersons' kitchen table, warm coffee in their hands, while Sarah prepared a makeshift bottle for the filly. She used a clean cloth tied around the narrow end of a bottle, creating a nipple that the filly could suckle. "It is not perfect, but it will work," Sarah explained. "I raised a lamb this way 2 years ago when its mother died." When Sarah offered the bottle to the filly, the little horse was hesitant at first, but hunger won out. Soon she was drinking eagerly, her tail swishing with contentment. "Look at that," Sarah said with satisfaction. "She is a fighter, this one." "Her mother ran off during the storm last night," Nora explained. "I found the filly just after she was born." Sarah looked at Nora with new respect. "And you stayed with her in that blizzard." "I could not leave her." "Well, you are either very brave or very foolish," Sarah said, echoing Jackson's words from the night before. "But I admire your dedication. Not many people would risk their lives for an animal." Tom Henderson came in then, a tall man with weathered skin and a gentle demeanor. When he heard the story, he shook his head in amazement. "You are lucky Jackson here found you. That storm was a mean one. We lost 2 chickens to the cold and they were in the barn." "I know how lucky I am," Nora said quietly, her eyes finding Jackson's across the table. They stayed at the Hendersons' ranch for a few hours, making sure the filly was stable and well fed. Sarah insisted on preparing a proper meal for them, and over roast chicken and potatoes, Jackson learned more about Nora's life. She had been born in Missouri in 1861, making her 23 years old. Her mother had died when she was 10, and she had been raised by her father, who had treated her more like a son than a daughter in many ways. He had taught her to ride, to rope, to understand horse flesh and bloodlines. When he died of pneumonia 2 years ago, Nora had tried to continue his business, but his former clients had refused to work with her. She had sold everything except her father's best saddle and a few personal items, and headed west to start over. "I bought 20 acres outside Oro Grande last November," she said. "Paid for it outright with what I got from selling my father's business. It has a small cabin, barely more than a shack, but it is mine. I have been working odd jobs in town to save money for breeding stock. I thought if I could catch that wild stallion, I could start building my herd properly." 20 acres is not much for running horses," Tom Henderson observed. "You would need at least 50 to make a real go of it." "I know," Nora said, "but it is a start. I can expand later once I have proven myself." Jackson admired her optimism, even if he privately thought her plan was nearly impossible. Starting a horse breeding operation from nothing, especially as a woman alone, was a monumental challenge. But he had seen her determination last night, the way she had refused to give up even when freezing to death. If anyone could beat the odds, maybe it was Nora Garrett. As the afternoon wore on, Jackson knew they needed to make a decision. "We should head to Oro Grande before dark," he said. "Get you both somewhere warm and safe." "What about the filly's mother?" Nora asked. "Should we not try to find her? In this terrain, after that storm, the herd could be anywhere," Jackson said. "And even if we found them, there is no guarantee the mare would accept the filly back now. Sometimes when they are separated like this, especially with a first-time mother, the bond is broken." Nora's face fell. "So she is an orphan. She has you," Jackson pointed out gently. Sarah Henderson, who had been listening, spoke up. "I can spare some goat's milk for the next week or so. After that, you will need to find another solution. As she gets bigger, she will need more than I can provide." "How much do I owe you?" Nora asked, reaching for the small pouch at her belt. "Nothing," Sarah said firmly. "Any woman who would risk her life for a baby animal is welcome to my help." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You are very kind." The ride to Oro Grande took about 2 hours. Jackson rode behind Nora again, the filly cradled between them. The little horse was sleeping now, her belly full of milk, and Jackson could feel her warm weight against his arm. He was also acutely aware of Nora's back pressed against his chest, the way she fit perfectly in the circle of his arms. He tried not to think about how right it felt, how natural. He had only known this woman for less than a day. These feelings made no sense, and yet he could not deny them. Oro Grande was a small town, barely more than a main street, with a scattering of buildings: a general store, a saloon, a church, a boarding house, a livery stable, and a few other establishments. It had been founded 5 years ago when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains, and while the silver had not panned out as hoped, the town had survived by serving the surrounding ranches. "My land is about 3 miles east of town," Nora said as they rode down the main street. "But I need to stop at the general store first for some supplies." Jackson helped her dismount, taking the filly in his arms. A few people on the street stopped to stare, curiosity plain on their faces. Jackson recognized old Pete Carter, who worked at the livery, and Mrs. Sullivan, the banker's wife. Both were notorious gossips. Inside the general store, the proprietor, a balding man named Henry Walsh, looked up from behind the counter. His expression soured when he saw Nora. "Miss Garrett," he said, his tone just barely civil, "I was not expecting you today." "I need some supplies, Mr. Walsh. Coffee, flour, beans, and bacon if you have it." "I have it, but it will cost you. Prices have gone up since last week." Jackson saw Nora's jaw tighten, but she just nodded. As Walsh gathered the items, moving deliberately slowly, Jackson felt his temper rise. The man was clearly trying to provoke her. "You know," Jackson said conversationally, "Mr. Garrison shops here regularly. He always tells me how fair and honest Mr. Walsh is with his prices. I am sure he would be interested to hear if that had changed." Walsh's head snapped up and he looked at Jackson properly for the first time. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You are one of Garrison's men." "That is right. Head horse wrangler." The change in Walsh's demeanor was immediate. Suddenly he was all smiles and efficiency. "Well now, let me make sure I give you folks a fair price. No need to bother Mr. Garrison with such trivial matters." Within minutes, the supplies were packaged up at a reasonable price, and Walsh even threw in an extra pound of coffee for good measure. Nora paid him with coins from her pouch, her expression carefully neutral. Outside, as they loaded the supplies onto Ranger, Nora turned to Jackson. "Thank you for that. He always overcharges me. I noticed. Does that happen often?" "More often than not," Nora admitted. "It is why I have to be so careful with money. Every dollar goes half as far for me as it does for anyone else." Jackson felt a surge of anger on her behalf, but he kept his voice calm. "That is not right. No, it is not, but it is reality. Nora took the filly from him, cradling her gently. My cabin is not far. You should come with me, make sure we get there safely. Then you can head back to the Garrison Ranch. Jackson agreed, though he found himself reluctant to leave her. The idea of Nora alone in a shack miles from town, trying to raise an orphaned filly while building a horse breeding business with no resources, it worried him more than it should. Nora's land was modest, but had potential. The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table and 2 chairs, and some basic shelving. But it was clean and well-maintained, and through the window Jackson could see a small corral and a lean-to shelter that served as a barn. It is not much, but it is mine, Nora said, a note of pride in her voice. No one can take it from me. Jackson dismounted and helped her down, then carried her supplies inside while she settled the filly in the lean-to on a bed of fresh straw. When he joined her there, he saw that she had already set out water and created a makeshift pen to keep the filly safe. She should be comfortable here, Nora said, stroking the filly's neck. I will need to feed her every few hours, but that is manageable. What will you do for milk after this week? Jackson asked. Nora bit her lip. I am not sure yet. Maybe I can find a nursing mare somewhere, though that will be expensive, or I will have to keep buying goat's milk somehow. Jackson made a decision then that he knew would change things, but he could not seem to help himself. The Garrison Ranch has 2 mares that foaled in the past month. One of them might accept the filly. Mr. Garrison is a hard man in business, but he is fair, and he has a soft spot for horses. I could talk to him, see if he would be willing to help. Nora's eyes widened. You would do that for me? Why? It was a fair question. Jackson looked at her, at this brave, determined woman who had risked everything for a creature that was not even hers, and he knew the answer even if he was not ready to say it aloud yet. Because it is the right thing to do, he said instead. And because I think you deserve a chance to build what you are trying to build here. Nora stepped closer to him, and Jackson caught the scent of her hair, something like lavender and sage. You barely know me, she said softly. I know enough, Jackson replied, his voice rough. I know you are brave and kind and stubborn as hell. I know you have a gift with horses that most people only dream of, and I know that you deserve better than how this town has treated you. For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other in the dim light of the lean-to. Jackson could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the pull toward her like a physical thing. Then the filly made a small sound, breaking the spell, and they both stepped back. I should head back, Jackson said, clearing his throat. It is a long ride to the ranch. Of course, Nora said, though he thought he heard disappointment in her voice. Thank you again for everything. I owe you my life. You do not owe me anything, Jackson said firmly, but I will come back tomorrow with news about the mare. Will you be all right here alone tonight? I have been alone for 6 months, Nora pointed out. One more night will not kill me. But Jackson noticed that she did not quite meet his eyes when she said it, and he wondered if she was as unaffected by their connection as she was trying to appear. The ride back to the Garrison Ranch was cold and lonely. Jackson kept thinking about Nora in that little cabin, about the challenges she faced, about the way she had looked at him in the lean-to. He tried to tell himself that his interest was purely friendly, that he just wanted to help someone in need. But he knew he was lying to himself. When he finally reached the ranch well after dark, his boss, Samuel Garrison, was waiting for him on the porch of the main house. Zane, Garrison called out, where the hell have you been? You were supposed to be back 2 days ago. Jackson dismounted and led Ranger to the barn, Garrison following. As he unsaddled his horse and rubbed him down, he told Garrison about the blizzard, about finding Nora and the filly, about everything that had happened. Garrison, a man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes, listened without interrupting. When Jackson finished, Garrison was quiet for a long moment. "So you want me to let this woman bring an orphaned filly here to nurse from one of my mares?" he finally said. "Yes, sir." "And you met her less than 24 hours ago?" "Yes, sir." Garrison studied Jackson's face in the lamplight. "You like this woman?" It was not a question, but Jackson answered anyway. "I respect her, sir. She risked her life to save that filly, and she is trying to build something on her own against odds that would make most men quit. I think she deserves help. Most men would have left that filly to die and saved their own skin," Garrison observed. "She is not most men." A slight smile crossed Garrison's weathered face. "No, I suppose not," he sighed. "All right, Zane, bring her and the filly here tomorrow. We will see if Daisy will accept another foal. But I want to meet this woman myself, understand?" Relief flooded through Jackson. "Yes, sir, thank you, sir." "Do not thank me yet. Daisy is temperamental. She might reject the filly outright." Garrison paused at the barn door. "And Zane, if this woman is as special as you seem to think, do not let her slip away. Good women are rare out here, especially ones who understand horses." Jackson felt heat rise in his face, but he just nodded. "Yes, sir." That night, lying in his bunk in the ranch hand's quarters, Jackson could not sleep. He kept seeing Nora's face, hearing her voice, remembering the way she had felt in his arms when he carried her to safety. He had only known her for a day, but somehow it felt like longer. It felt like something important had shifted in his life, like a door had opened that he had not even known was there. He rode out to Nora's cabin at first light the next morning, eager to bring her the good news. When he arrived, he found her in the lean-to with the filly, trying to get her to drink from another makeshift bottle. "She is not taking it as well this morning," Nora said, frustration evident in her voice. "I think she knows this is not what she is supposed to be getting." "I have good news," Jackson said, and watched as hope lit up Nora's face. "Mr. Garrison agreed to let you bring her to the ranch. We have a mare named Daisy who foaled about 3 weeks ago. Her colt is strong and does not need all her milk. We can try to get Daisy to accept the filly." "Really?" "Oh, Jackson, that is wonderful." Without thinking, Nora threw her arms around him in a hug. Jackson froze for a second, surprised, then wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. She fit perfectly against him, her head just under his chin, and for a moment they stayed like that, holding each other in the early morning light. When Nora pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I am sorry. I should not have. Do not apologize," Jackson said quickly. "I am glad I could help." They rode to the Garrison ranch together, taking turns carrying the filly. The little horse was definitely getting weaker, and Jackson knew that if Daisy rejected her, they would be in serious trouble. The Garrison ranch was one of the largest in the territory, with over 5,000 acres of grazing land, hundreds of cattle, and a prize-winning herd of horses. The main house was an impressive 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, and there were multiple barns, bunkhouses, and outbuildings spread across the property. Nora's eyes widened as they rode in. "This is where you work for the past 4 years. It is a good outfit. Mr. Garrison pays fair wages and treats his men well." They found Garrison in the largest barn, inspecting a new colt. When he saw them approach, he straightened up, and Jackson saw him assess Nora in one sharp glance. "Mr. Garrison, this is Miss Nora Garrett." "Nora, this is Samuel Garrison, owner of the Garrison Ranch." "Mr. Garrison," Nora said, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to help us. I know it is an imposition." Garrison shook her hand firmly, respect in his eyes at her direct manner. "Jackson tells me you saved this filly's life at considerable risk to your own." "The filly could not save herself. Someone had to help her." Most people would not have bothered. Then most people are wrong, Nora said simply. A smile tugged at Garrison's mouth. I like you, Miss Garrett. You have steel in your spine. Now let us see if we can get Daisy to accept your little friend here. Daisy was a gentle bay mare with a calm temperament. Her colt, a sturdy sorrel, was healthy and active. The trick would be getting Daisy to allow another foal to nurse without rejecting it. We will need to be clever about this, Garrison said, examining the filly. Horses recognize their offspring by smell. We need to make this filly smell like Daisy's colt. It took over an hour of careful work. They rubbed the filly down with straw from the colt's stall, then with a cloth that had been rubbed all over the colt. The filly was weak and did not protest much, which worried Jackson. Finally, they brought her into Daisy's stall while Garrison held the mare's halter. At first, Daisy snorted and stamped, clearly agitated by the strange foal. But the filly, driven by instinct and hunger, stumbled toward the mare, searching for milk. Garrison kept Daisy steady, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. Come on, girl. You have plenty to spare. Be a good mama. The filly found Daisy's teat and began to nurse. Daisy shifted nervously and Jackson held his breath. Then, slowly, the mare relaxed. She turned her head to sniff at the filly, and while she did not seem entirely convinced, she did not reject her either. That is a good girl, Daisy, Garrison murmured. That is my good girl. They stayed there for 20 minutes, watching carefully, making sure Daisy was truly accepting the filly. The little horse nursed eagerly, her tail swishing, and slowly her strength seemed to return. I think it is going to work, Nora breathed, tears streaming down her face. She is going to be all right. Jackson felt his own throat tighten with emotion. You did that. You saved her life. We both did, Nora corrected, looking at him with those incredible green eyes. I could not have done any of this without you. Garrison cleared his throat, breaking the moment. The filly will need to stay here for at least a month, maybe longer, until she is weaned. You are welcome to visit her any time, Miss Garrett. I could not possibly impose like that, Nora protested. You have already done so much. It is no imposition. In fact, I have a proposal for you. Garrison released Daisy's halter now that the mare seemed settled. Jackson tells me you are trying to start a horse breeding operation on your land. That is ambitious for anyone, let alone a woman alone. Nora's chin lifted, a defensive look crossing her face. I know what I am doing with horses, Mr. Garrison. I do not doubt it. Anyone who would risk their life to save a foal clearly has a deep understanding of horses. But you need capital, connections, and expertise in the business side of things. I can provide all of that. I do not take charity, Nora said firmly. I am not offering charity. I am offering a business partnership. Garrison leaned against the stall door. You work here on the ranch for the next 6 months, helping Jackson with the horses. I will pay you standard wages, plus room and board in the spare room at the foreman's house. In exchange, you learn the business from me, make connections with other ranchers, and save your money. At the end of 6 months, I will provide you with 2 quality mares and access to my stallion for breeding. We will split any profits from the foals 50-50. Nora stared at him, speechless. Jackson was equally surprised. Garrison was known for being fair, but this was generous even for him. Why would you do this? Nora finally asked. Because good horse people are hard to find, and from what Jackson tells me, you are exceptional. Because I believe in giving people a chance to prove themselves. And because, he glanced at Jackson with a knowing look. I think you might become part of this ranch family in more ways than one. Jackson felt his face flush, but he did not deny it. He could not when every part of him was drawn to Nora like iron to a magnet. Nora was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on the filly's back. If I accept, I want to be paid the same as any man doing the same work. Agreed. And I want it in writing, the terms of the partnership, of course. And I get to keep my land and my independence. This is a business arrangement, not ownership of me. Garrison smiled. Miss Garrett, I think we are going to get along just fine. Do we have a deal? Nora extended her hand. We have a deal, Mr. Garrison. As they shook on it, Jackson felt something settle in his chest, a rightness that he had not felt in years. Nora would be here, on the ranch, working beside him every day. He would have time to get to know her, to let whatever was growing between them develop naturally. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about the future. Over the next few weeks, Nora settled into life at the Garrison Ranch. She stayed in the spare room at the foreman's house, a small but comfortable space with a real bed and even a washstand with a mirror. After 6 months in her tiny cabin, it felt like luxury. She worked alongside Jackson every day, and he was impressed by how quickly she learned the routines of the ranch. She had not been exaggerating about her knowledge of horses. She could assess a horse's temperament and health at a glance, had a gift for calming even the most nervous animals, and understood bloodlines and breeding in a way that came from years of study and practice. More than that, the other ranch hands came to respect her. At first, they had been skeptical, making jokes behind her back about a woman trying to do a man's work. But after she successfully broke a difficult 3-year-old gelding that 2 experienced hands had given up on, the jokes stopped. When she diagnosed and treated a mare's colic, saving the animal's life, they started coming to her for advice. Jackson watched it all with a mixture of pride and growing affection. Every day, he found new reasons to admire Nora, the way she laughed at the ranch hands' terrible jokes, the way she always made time to visit the filly, who was thriving under Daisy's care, the way her face lit up when she talked about her plans for her own breeding program. He was falling in love with her. He knew it with a certainty that should have terrified him but somehow did not. He had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought it was something foolish people made up. But from the moment he had seen Nora huddled against that canyon wall, protecting the filly with her own body, something in him had recognized something in her, like calling to like. The problem was, he did not know if she felt the same way. She was friendly with him, warm even, but she kept a certain distance. Sometimes he would catch her looking at him with an expression he could not quite read, but whenever he tried to get closer emotionally, she would pull back. It was Garrison who finally called him on it. They were in the barn one evening in late March, checking on a mare about to foal, when Garrison said, "You are going to need to tell her eventually." Jackson did not pretend to misunderstand. "Tell her what?" "That you are in love with her." Jackson felt his chest tighten. "Is it that obvious?" "To everyone except apparently her, yes." Garrison checked the mare's water bucket. "The woman is brilliant with horses but dense as a post when it comes to reading her own feelings. Or maybe she is scared. I imagine she has been hurt before, dismissed and rejected enough times to make her wary. So what do? You tell her the truth. You lay your cards on the table and let her decide. The worst she can do is say no." "That is what I am afraid of," Jackson admitted. Garrison put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, I have known you for 4 years. I have seen you break wild horses, ride out into blizzards, work yourself to exhaustion. You are not a man who is afraid of much. Do not let fear keep you from the best thing that is ever going to happen to you." Jackson knew Garrison was right. The question was how to tell Nora what he felt without scaring her away. The opportunity came a week later. Jackson and Nora had ridden out to check on a herd of horses grazing in one of the far pastures. It was a beautiful April day, the sky a brilliant blue, the air warm and filled with the scent of sage and wildflowers. They sat on their horses at the top of a hill, watching the herd graze below. The filly was down there, now almost 2 months old, strong and healthy and playing with Daisy's colt. Watching her run and buck and explore, no one would ever guess how close to death she had been. "She is going to be something special," Nora said softly. "I can see it in the way she moves. She is going to be tall and fast." "What will you do with her?" Jackson asked. "When the 6 months are up and you start your breeding program." "I have been thinking about that. She is too young to breed for at least 2 years, but I could train her as a saddle horse, maybe even race her. If she is as fast as I think she will be, we could win some money, use that to build the business." Nora turned to him, excitement in her eyes. "I have been doing calculations. With the 2 mares Mr. Garrison is giving me and access to his stallion, plus the filly when she is old enough, I could have a herd of 20 horses within 5 years. Not huge, but respectable. And if I focus on quality over quantity, I could build a reputation for breeding the best horses in the territory." Jackson loved seeing her like this, passionate and animated, her whole face glowing with possibility. "You will do it," he said. "I have no doubt." "I could not have done any of this without you," Nora said, her voice going soft. "You saved my life, Jackson. And more than that, you believed in me when no one else did. I will never forget that." This was it, Jackson realized. This was the moment. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it, but he forced himself to speak. "Nora, there is something I need to tell you." She turned to look at him fully, and he saw wariness creep into her eyes. "What is it?" He paused, trying to find the right words. "That night in the blizzard when I found you with the filly, something happened to me. I know it sounds crazy. I know we barely knew each other. But from that moment, I felt something I have never felt before. And every day since then, it has only gotten stronger." Nora's breath caught and she looked away. "Jackson, please, let me finish." He guided his horse closer to hers until they were side by side, close enough that he could reach out and take her hand if he dared. "I love you, Nora. I love your strength and your courage and your kindness. I love how you risked your life for a creature that was not even yours. I love how you refused to give up on your dreams even when everyone told you to quit. I love how you see the world, how you understand horses, how you make me want to be a better man." "Stop," Nora whispered, and Jackson felt his heart crack. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "I should not have said anything. Please just forget. I know you do not understand." Nora turned back to him, and Jackson was stunned to see tears streaming down her face. "I feel the same way. I have been falling in love with you since that first night, since you gave me your coat and carried me to safety and saved the filly's life along with mine. But I am scared, Jackson. I am so scared." Relief and hope flooded through him, so intense it made him dizzy. "Scared of what?" "Of losing myself, of becoming dependent on you. My whole life, people have told me what I cannot do, what I am not capable of as a woman. I have fought so hard to be independent, to prove I can make it on my own. If I let myself love you, if I let myself need you, what happens to that? What happens to my dreams?" Jackson slid off his horse and came to stand beside Nora's mount, looking up at her. "Your dreams do not disappear just because you love someone. If anything, having someone who loves you and supports you makes your dreams easier to reach. I do not want to own you or control you or make you into something you are not. I just want to be by your side while you become everything you are meant to be." "You promise?" Nora asked, her voice breaking. "You promise you will not try to change me?" "I promise. I love you exactly as you are. I would not change a single thing." Nora dismounted then, standing in front of him so close he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me." Jackson cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Do not be terrified. We will figure this out together." Then he kissed her, and it was like coming home. Nora's arms came around his neck, and she kissed him back with a passion that took his breath away. They stood there on the hilltop, surrounded by wildflowers and blue sky, and Jackson knew that this moment would be etched in his memory forever. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nora laughed shakily. "Well, that was." "Yes, it was," Jackson agreed, unable to stop smiling. They sat down in the grass, looking out over the valley, their hands entwined. For a long time they did not speak, just sat together in comfortable silence. Jackson felt a peace he had never known before, a sense of rightness that went bone deep. "What happens now?" Nora finally asked. "We keep working toward your dreams. We finish out the 6 months. We build your breeding program together. And somewhere along the way, when the time is right, I am going to ask you to marry me." Nora looked at him, surprise in her eyes. "You are that sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." Jackson brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "But there is no rush. We have time. I want to do this right. Want to give you space to build your business and prove to yourself what I already know, that you can do anything you set your mind to. And if I say yes, when you ask me to marry you, then we will figure out how to blend our lives together in a way that works for both of us. Maybe I can help you run your breeding operation while still working for Garrison. Maybe we can expand your 20 acres into something bigger. Maybe we can build something neither of us could have built alone." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "I like the sound of that." They stayed there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. When they finally rode back to the ranch, hand in hand as much as they could manage on horseback, Jackson felt like the luckiest man alive. The next few months passed in a blur of work and growing love. Jackson and Nora kept their relationship mostly private at first, not wanting to deal with gossip or speculation, but eventually word got around the ranch. To Jackson's relief, the reaction was mostly positive. The ranch hands liked Nora and were happy to see their taciturn horse wrangler finally smile on a regular basis. Garrison, of course, had known all along. "Took you long enough," was all he said when Jackson officially told him, but his eyes twinkled with amusement. The filly continued to thrive, growing into a leggy, curious youngster who followed Daisy everywhere. Nora spent hours with her, teaching her to lead, to tolerate being touched all over, to trust humans. It was clear the bond between them was special. "I am going to call her Storm," Nora told Jackson one evening as they watched the filly play. "Because she was born in a blizzard and because she is strong enough to weather anything. Storm, I like it. It suits her." In June, Garrison made good on his promise. He selected 2 quality mares for Nora, both with excellent bloodlines and gentle temperaments. One was a Palomino named Buttercup, the other a dark bay named Willow. "These are some of my best breeding stock," Garrison told Nora as he signed over the papers. "Take care of them and they will take care of you." Nora threw her arms around the older man, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Garrison. You have given me a chance when no one else would. I will never forget that." "You earned it," Garrison said gruffly. "Now get out of here before I get all sentimental." The 6 months were coming to an end, and Jackson knew it was time. On a warm evening in early July, he asked Nora to go for a ride with him. They rode out to the same hilltop where they had first confessed their love, where wildflowers still bloomed and the view stretched for miles. Jackson had been nervous all day, and now his hands were actually shaking as he dismounted and helped Nora down. She looked beautiful in the golden light of sunset, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes bright with curiosity. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Is everything all right?" Everything is perfect, Jackson said. He took both her hands in his, looking into her eyes. Nora, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Watching you work, seeing you succeed, learning who you are at your core, it has been an honor. I meant what I said that day. I love you exactly as you are, and I want to spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams and building new ones together. He dropped to one knee, pulling out a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. Nora Garrett, will you marry me? Nora's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, she breathed. Oh, Jackson, yes. Jackson slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. They kissed as the sun set behind them, sealing the promise they were making to each other. The wedding took place in August, in the small church in Oro Grande. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the ranch hands from Garrison's outfit, Sarah and Tom Henderson, and a few townspeople who had come to respect Nora over the past months. Garrison gave her away, and Nora wore a simple but beautiful dress of cream-colored cotton that Sarah had helped her sew. When Jackson saw her walking down the aisle toward him, his breath caught. She was radiant, smiling at him with such love and joy that he felt his eyes sting with tears. They exchanged vows in front of the minister, promising to love and cherish each other for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. I now pronounce you man and wife, the minister intoned. You may kiss your bride. Jackson pulled Nora into his arms and kissed her to the sound of cheering and applause. When they pulled apart, both laughing through tears, he whispered in her ear, I love you, Mrs. Zane. I love you too, husband. The reception was held at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Jackson danced with his new wife under the stars, holding her close, feeling like the luckiest man who had ever lived. Garrison had given them a wedding present that took both their breaths away, 100 acres of land adjacent to Nora's original 20, plus materials to build a proper house and barn. Consider it an investment in the future of horse breeding in this territory, Garrison said when they tried to protest. And also payment for putting up with Zane all these years, he added with a wink. Over the next 2 years, Jackson and Nora built their dream together. They constructed a beautiful home with a wide porch and enough room to grow their family. They built a proper barn and corrals. They bred Buttercup and Willow to Garrison's best stallion, and both mares produced strong, healthy foals. Storm, true to Nora's prediction, grew into a magnificent horse. Tall and fast with incredible stamina, she won 3 races in her first year of competition, earning Jackson and Nora enough money to buy 2 more quality mares. Word spread about the quality of the Zane breeding program, and buyers started coming from all over the territory. In the spring of 1887, Nora gave birth to their first child, a son they named James after Jackson's late father. Jackson held his boy for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude he felt. We made this, Nora said softly, watching him. You and me together. We made everything together, Jackson replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. The ranch, the business, this beautiful life. And I would do it all over again exactly the same way as long as it led me back to you. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Grace, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. And 2 years after that, another son, Thomas. The Zane breeding program became one of the most respected in New Mexico territory. Horses bred and trained by Nora and Jackson were known for their intelligence, temperament, and endurance. They commanded top prices, and soon the Zanes were able to expand their operation further, eventually owning over 500 acres. Storm lived to the ripe old age of 25, producing 12 foals in her lifetime, each one of exceptional quality. When she finally died peacefully in her sleep one autumn night, both Jackson and Nora wept. They buried her on the hilltop where Jackson had proposed, marking her grave with a simple stone that read, "Storm, born in a blizzard, forever in our hearts." Through it all, Jackson and Nora's love only deepened. They worked side by side every day, sharing the triumphs and challenges of building a life together. They supported each other through hard times, droughts and lean years, sick animals and difficult births. They celebrated together during good times, successful sales and beautiful foals, their children's milestones and achievements. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Nora back to that same hilltop. They were older now, both in their mid-40s, with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of hard work and laughter. Below them, their ranch sprawled across the valley, a testament to everything they had built together. "You remember that night?" Jackson asked, holding Nora close. "When I found you with that newborn foal in the cold, how could I forget?" Nora said, leaning back against him. "It was the night my whole life changed, the night I met you." "I knew," Jackson said. "Even then, I knew you were going to be important to me. I just did not know how much." "I was so scared," Nora admitted, "not of dying, but of loving you, of losing myself to someone else." "Did you lose yourself?" Nora turned in his arms to face him, her green eyes as bright as they had been 20 years ago. "No, I found myself. With you, I became more than I ever could have been alone. We became more together than either of us could have been apart." Jackson kissed her, still as in love with her as he had been that first night, maybe even more so now that he knew every facet of her, every strength and vulnerability, every dream and fear. "Here is to another 20 years, he said. "And 20 more after that," Nora agreed. They stood there as the sun set, surrounded by the life they had built, the love they had shared, the family they had created. And Jackson thought back to that young man riding through a blizzard, who had stumbled upon a woman protecting a newborn foal with her own body, and he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for that storm. Thank you for leading me to her. Thank you for every moment since." Because from that one moment of finding her in the cold, everything good in his life had flowed. The ranch, the horses, the children, the decades of love and partnership and joy. All of it had started with a cowboy, a woman, a newborn foal, and a fire that warmed them all. And as the stars came out over the New Mexico desert, Jackson Zane held his wife close and knew that he would not change a single moment of the beautiful, extraordinary life they had built together. From that cold February night to this perfect evening, from two strangers brought together by chance to a couple bound by love deeper than the canyons and higher than the mountains, they had found each other against all odds, and that was the greatest gift of all. Their children grew strong and capable. James took over much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch when he turned 25, showing the same gift with horses that his mother possessed. Grace surprised them all by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in the territory to do so, and her expertise with animal medicine became invaluable to the family business. Thomas, their youngest, had a head for numbers and business and managed the financial side of the operation, expanding their reach even further. But every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, Jackson and Nora would sit together on the porch of the house they had built with their own hands, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Sometimes they talked about the day's events, sometimes they planned for the future, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, grateful for every moment they had together. On their 30th anniversary, Their children and grandchildren, for by then James and Grace had both married and started families of their own, threw them a party at the ranch. Friends came from all over the territory, ranchers and breeders who had worked with them over the years, townspeople from Oro Grande who had watched their success with admiration. Samuel Garrison, now in his 80s and retired but still sharp as ever, raised a glass in toast. 30 years ago, I took a chance on a stubborn young woman who thought she could build a horse breeding business from nothing. And I am man enough to admit I did not think she would last 6 months. But Nora Zane proved me wrong, proved everyone wrong, and she did it with strength and determination, and a gift with horses that cannot be taught. And Jackson, you were smart enough to recognize something special when you saw it and brave enough to fight for it. Together, you have built something remarkable, not just a successful business but a true partnership, a real love, a legacy that will last for generations. To Jackson and Nora, to Jackson and Nora, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet again, Jackson and Nora walked out to the barn to check on the horses one last time before bed. It was a ritual they had maintained for 30 years, this final walk through, making sure all was well. In the largest stall, a mare named Star, one of Storm's granddaughters, had given birth that afternoon to a strong colt. They stood together watching the baby nurse, his little tail swishing contentedly. "New life," Nora said softly. "There is always new life, new beginnings, new chances." "Like we had," Jackson said, pulling her close. "We were so young," Nora said, thinking back. "So naive about how hard it would be. If I had known then everything we would face, the droughts, the losses, the years of scraping by, I wonder if I would have had the courage to start." "But you did not know," Jackson pointed out, "and that was the blessing. We took it one day at a time, one challenge at a time, and we did it together, and look what we built." Nora smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We built a good life, did we not? The best life," Jackson agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They stood there watching the mare and her foal, and Jackson thought about all the foals they had helped bring into the world over the past 30 years, all the horses they had bred and trained and sold to good homes. Each one had been important, each one had mattered, but that first foal Storm, born in a blizzard and saved by Nora's courage, she had been the beginning of everything. "You ever think about her?" Nora asked, as if reading his thoughts. "About Storm, all the time. She was special." "She brought us together," Nora said. "If I had not found her that night, if you had not come along when you did, none of this would exist. Our whole life together started with a newborn foal in the cold and a cowboy who warmed us both by his fire." Jackson turned Nora to face him, looking into the eyes he had loved for 30 years and would love for 30 more if he was blessed with that much time. "It started with a woman brave enough to risk everything to save a life, and a man smart enough to recognize that kind of courage when he saw it. We were meant to find each other, Nora. Storm was just the catalyst." "You really believe that? That we were meant to be?" "I do. I believe that every choice we made, every path we took, was leading us to each other. And I believe that we will keep finding each other, in this life and whatever comes after." Nora stood on her toes to kiss him, and it was as sweet and full of love as their first kiss had been all those years ago on that hilltop. When they pulled apart, both smiling, Jackson took her hand and led her back to the house, to the life they had built, to the family they had created, to the love that had sustained them through 3 decades, and would sustain them for however many more they were given. Behind them, in the barn, the newborn colt finished nursing and lay down in the straw beside his mother, safe and warm and loved. And somewhere up on that hilltop where Storm was buried, where Jackson had proposed, where they had stood together so many times over the years somewhere up there. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the memory of a young woman and a newborn foal huddled in the cold, and a cowboy who warmed them both by his fire, and the love story that bloomed from that single moment of compassion and courage. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Jackson and Nora grew older together, their love maturing and deepening like fine wine. They faced the loss of friends and loved ones. Garrison passed away when Jackson was 52, leaving a hole in both their hearts, for the old rancher had been more than a boss. He had been a mentor and a friend. Sarah Henderson followed a few years later, and Tom not long after that. But there were joys too. Grandchildren who loved spending summers at the ranch, learning to ride and care for horses just as their parents had. Great-grandchildren who toddled around the barn under watchful eyes, already showing signs of the family gift with animals. The ranch continued to prosper, with the Zane name becoming synonymous with quality and integrity in horse breeding circles throughout the territory and beyond. When New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, Jackson and Nora celebrated with their family and friends, marveling at how much the territory had changed since they had first met in 1884. The wild, rough frontier they had known was becoming more civilized, more settled, but the land itself remained as beautiful and unforgiving as ever. On Jackson's 70th birthday, Nora gave him a gift that made him weep: a leather-bound book she had spent years writing in secret, chronicling their life together from that first night in the blizzard to the present day. She had filled it with stories, memories, and photographs, creating a record of their love and their family that would last for generations. "So our great-great-grandchildren will know our story," she explained. "So they will know how it all started, with a newborn foal in the cold and a cowboy brave enough to stop and help." Jackson held the book like the treasure it was, running his weathered hands over the cover. "You were the brave one," he said. "You risked everything." "We both did," Nora corrected. "You risked your heart on a stubborn woman with impossible dreams." "Best risk I ever took." They were in their 70s when the great influenza pandemic of 1918 swept through the country. It was a terrifying time, with people dying by the thousands, whole families wiped out. Jackson and Nora isolated themselves on the ranch, allowing only family to visit and taking every precaution they could. But in November of that year, Jackson came down with a fever. Nora nursed him day and night, refusing to leave his side despite the protests of their children, who were terrified of losing them both. For 3 weeks, Jackson hovered between life and death, his strong body ravaged by the illness. In his delirium he called out for Nora, reliving that first night when he had found her in the blizzard. "Have to save her," he mumbled. "Have to keep the fire going. She is so cold." "I am here," Nora would say, bathing his forehead with cool water, holding his hand. "I am right here, my love. You already saved me. You saved me that night and every day since." When the fever finally broke and Jackson's eyes opened clear and focused for the first time in weeks, the first thing he saw was Nora's face, lined and tired but so beautiful to him, it made his heart ache. "You did not leave me," he rasped. "Never," Nora said, tears streaming down her face. "I will never leave you. We are bound together, you and I, for this life and beyond." Jackson recovered slowly but fully, and the experience left them both shaken but somehow even more grateful for each day they had together. They had always known their time was finite, but now they felt it in their bones, a urgency to make every moment count. They spent more time with their family, taking joy in watching their grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow. They took long rides together across the ranch, revisiting all the places that held memories: the canyon where Jackson had camped that first night, the hilltop where he had proposed, the barn where Storm had first learned to trust humans. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1934, the family threw a massive celebration. The ranch was overflowing with people: children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends from all over the state. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. But the highlight of the evening was when Jackson stood up to make a speech. He was 78 years old now, his hair completely white, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. But his eyes were still bright, still full of love as he looked at Nora sitting beside him. 50 years ago, he began, his voice still strong, I married the love of my life. But our story actually began 6 months before that, on a cold February night in 1884. I was tracking wild horses through a blizzard when I came across a sight. I will never forget: a young woman huddled against a canyon wall, using her own body to protect a newborn foal from the cold. That woman was willing to die to save a life, and that courage, that compassion, that strength, it changed everything for me. He reached out and took Nora's hand, and she squeezed back, tears already flowing down her cheeks. I took them both back to my camp and warmed them by my fire, and in doing so, I warmed my own heart, which I had not even realized had grown cold. Nora showed me what it meant to truly care about something beyond yourself. She showed me what it meant to fight for your dreams even when everyone tells you they are impossible. She showed me what it meant to love with your whole heart and not hold anything back. Jackson paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. These 50 years with you, Nora, have been the greatest gift of my life. You made me a better man, a better father, a better friend. You took my small, lonely life and filled it with love and purpose and joy. And I want you to know, here in front of all these people we love, that I would do it all again. I would ride through that blizzard 1,000 times if it meant finding you, helping you, loving you. He leaned down and kissed her gently while the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. When he pulled back, Nora stood up, and he saw that she wanted to speak too. I was so scared that night, she said, her voice clear despite her tears. Not just of dying, though I was terrified of that too. I was scared of what would happen to the foal if I gave up. But then Jackson appeared, like an angel in the storm, and he saved us both. He gave us warmth and safety and care when we needed it most. She turned to look at him, her green eyes still as bright as they had been 50 years ago. You have been my rock, my partner, my best friend, and my truest love. You never tried to change me or diminish my dreams. Instead, you helped me achieve them, and then we built even bigger dreams together. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, they are all part of the legacy we created together, a legacy that started with a simple act of kindness on a cold night. She took both his hands in hers. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for warming me by your fire. Thank you for loving me exactly as I am. Thank you for 50 years of the most beautiful life I could have imagined. I love you, Jackson Zane, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They kissed again, and everyone in the room felt the power of their love, the depth of their connection. It was a love that had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle, endured every test. It was a love that had built something lasting and real and true. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the ranch was quiet once more, Jackson and Nora walked out to Storm's grave on the hilltop. They moved slowly now, their bodies aged and worn, but they still held hands like young lovers. At the gravestone, they stood looking out over the ranch, over the life they had built together. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light, and the air was warm and sweet with the scent of summer grass. "You remember what I said that first morning?" Nora asked. "When we were at your camp and you offered to help me. Remind me." "I said I could not live with myself if I had abandoned the foal, and you looked at me with those kind eyes, and I knew you were someone special, someone who understood that some things are worth risking everything for." "Like love," Jackson said. "Like love," Nora agreed. They stayed there for a long time, two old souls who had found each other against impossible odds and built a love story for the ages. Below them, the ranch slept, full of horses descended from storm and the mares they had carefully bred over 5 decades. Full of family who carried their bloodline and their values forward into the future. Full of love that had started with a single act of compassion on a cold February night. Jackson Zane passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1938 at the age of 82. He died as he had lived with Nora by his side, holding his hand. His last words were, "I will find you again. In the next life I will find you. And I will be waiting," Nora whispered back. She followed him 3 months later. The doctors said it was heart failure, but their children knew better. Nora had simply decided she had waited long enough to be reunited with the love of her life. They were buried side by side on that hilltop next to Storm, overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone read, Jackson Zane, 1856-1938 Nora Garrett Zane, 1861-1938. Together they built a legacy of love from a cold night, a warm fire, and hearts brave enough to believe in each other. The ranch continued to prosper for generations, run by their descendants who never forgot the story of how it all began. Every year on February 15th, the anniversary of that fateful night, the family would gather at the graves on the hilltop and tell the story again. The story of a woman brave enough to risk everything to save a newborn foal, and a cowboy who warmed them both by his fire, and the love that bloomed from that single moment of courage and compassion. And sometimes, on cold February nights when the wind howled across the New Mexico desert, the ranch hands would swear they could see 2 figures standing on that hilltop, holding hands and looking out over the land they loved. A man and a woman, forever young, forever together, forever bound by a love that death itself could not diminish, because some loves are eternal, some bonds can never be broken. And the love between Jackson Zane and Nora Garrett was one of those rare, precious connections that transcended time and space and mortality itself. It started with a newborn foal in the cold, a cowboy who stopped to help, and a fire that warmed not just bodies but souls. And it lasted beyond death, beyond time, beyond everything, a beacon of hope and proof that true love, real love, lasting love, is not just possible but worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of fear and doubt. Their story lived on, passed down through generations, inspiring others to believe in the power of kindness, the strength of courage, and the transformative force of love. And somewhere in whatever realm exists beyond this one, Jackson and Nora were together still, their hands entwined, their hearts forever one, their love an eternal flame that would never dim, never fade, never die. The end of their earthly story, perhaps, but not the end of their love. That would continue forever, as endless as the New Mexico sky, as vast as the desert landscape they had called home, as deep as the bond they had forged on that cold February night when a cowboy found a woman with a newborn foal and warmed them both by his fire, never knowing that in saving them, he was saving himself, finding his purpose, his partner, his soulmate, his everything. This was their story. This was their legacy. This was their gift to the world, proof that love, real and true and lasting, is always worth fighting for, always worth believing in, always worth the risk. And that sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unexpected ways, with a simple act of kindness on a cold winter night.